Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something pretty critical with truly global implications: India and its position right at the intersection of climate change and development.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation, almost a tightrope walk, you
Yep,
can say.
exactly, because you see these huge efforts on renewable energy, really massive pushes.
Hmm.
But at the same time, India remains a major carbon emitter. And, well, it's also facing some incredibly severe climate impacts already.
It's a nation at a real turning point, no question. I mean, the need to lift millions out of poverty, that demands economic growth,
Of course.
but that growth has to happen alongside dealing with a climate that's changing fast and hitting India particularly hard.
Right. And that's what we want to dig into today based on the material we've reviewed. We're aiming to sort of unpack the key tensions, the core choices India is facing on this climate journey.
Yeah, the sources really bring these out.
Think about Prime Minister Modi's big net zero pledge. That's on one
A
side.
huge commitment.
But then you have the ongoing, very real debate about coal versus renewables.
Still a major part of their energy mix, Cole.
And underpinning all of it are these fundamental questions about fairness, about, climate justice, who should really bear the burden of action.
The audio we looked at tackles this head on, I think. It paints this picture of a country really wrestling with these competing demands.
Yeah.
And what really stands out is just the sheer scale. The scale of the energy needed for that growing economy compared with the urgent need to cut emissions.
Yeah.
Well, it's huge.
And the stakes are incredibly high, aren't they? The material we saw positions India as potentially leading this whole zero carbon transition,
That could be.
but also highlights how incredibly vulnerable the country is to climate change itself. That's a massive weight to carry.
Absolutely. And that's the core tension, really. Can a country focused, quite rightly, on poverty reduction also lead the charge towards a zero-carbon world? That's the central question emerging.
It really is.
So, for instance, you see solar power capacity growing significantly, which is great. Impressive growth, yeah.
But coal is still providing a very large chunk of energy, and it's seen as vital for industry, for growth.
And you can see that conflict playing out, right, in the discussions about where the energy comes from. It's obviously not as easy as just, flicking a switch from coal to solar.
So not at all, not even close. The transition needs enormous investment. It needs technological breakthroughs.
Hmm.
And you have to think very carefully about the social side, the economic impacts on communities that, well, rely on the coal industry.
Yeah, those real-world impacts.
The sources definitely flag the logistical hurdles, the economic challenges in scaling up renewables fast enough and big enough for India's needs.
The material also brings up that point you mentioned earlier, climate justice. It's not just about the total emissions figures, is it?
No, absolutely not. In the Indian context, you often hear this argument about historical responsibility.
Right. The developed nations caused most of the problem historically. Precisely. And therefore, there's a need for proper support, financial support, technology transfer to help countries like India make that shift to cleaner energy and also adapt to the climate impacts they're already facing.
Which raises that big question about fairness, about equitable burden sharing in tackling this global problem.
Exactly. It's a key part of the conversation.
Okay, so if we try to pull this all together, what's the essential takeaway here? Looking at India's climate challenge through the lens of this material.
I'd say the fundamental tension is that drive for economic development, that ambition, hitting right up against the absolute necessity of decarbonizing the economy.
Yeah.
And how India manages that balancing act, well, it's going to have massive consequences, not just for India, but globally, for the climate and for billions of people.
The potential impacts are just immense. The sources really detail the threats India faces: worse heat waves, glaciers melting, which affects water supplies,
Huge water implications.
sea level rise hitting the coasts, agriculture being disrupted. The human cost is potentially staggering.
It is. And conversely, India's choices, its successes, could really shape the global path forward on decarbonization.
How so?
Well, as a major emerging economy, if India pioneers sustainable development pathways, if it really commits to clean energy innovation, that could provide a powerful model, maybe inspire action elsewhere.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it, when you consider just how vast India's development needs are, but also how urgent the climate crisis is. What does a genuinely fair energy transition look like in that context?
That's the million-dollar question, maybe the trillion-dollar question.
Yeah, and how can the rest of the world, global cooperation, best support a nation grappling with such enormous interconnected challenges? That's something to really mull over.